Hello, Martin Baker here from Baker's Garden Buildings, and in this video today we're going to look at the planning rules and building regulations for your garden building. Here at Baker's, we're a family-run business, been trading since 1985, and I formally took over from my father around about 15 years ago. We have always focused on quality buildings and service, and over the last 10 years I've pushed much more towards a lower maintenance options with long guarantees. Nowadays, around only 5% of our buildings have timber externally in their claddings, as we more favour zero maintenance, house specification materials. It gives you more like an extension of your home in your garden. We offer a complete package service from planning and PD certificates if needed. More on that in a moment. The base, electrics, sound and vision as a complete turnkey service for you. For more information on what we do, please go to our website, bakersgardenbuildings.co.uk, and you can keep up to date on all our social media and particularly this YouTube channel.
So let's start by explaining what you are and aren't allowed to do principally and what the terminologies are. So permitted development rights, or PD rights, that is a set of rules and circumstances where you're allowed to build garden buildings or even some extensions of your property without the need of getting planning permission from the council. If you know you've got these PD rights, you can just go ahead and build within that framework. Or you might want to reach out to the planning office and get what's called a certificate of lawful development. That's like a piece of paper from the planning office to say you don't need planning, you've got the rights to do that. And you may choose to do that if you're got a nightmare neighbour. Sometimes is a good reason why. Other times is if you've got a very expensive build. Some of our builds with endless pools and things like that might go into £150,000. Even though you're allowed to do that, you may decide that actually it's a good idea to get that paperwork in place. So for most properties, you have got PD rights. There are a number of occasions where these are either removed or reduced, and I'd like to explain that now with a plan drawing to show you some basic options. Assuming the normal rights apply, you can build a garden building in your back garden or the sides of your property down to the front of your house up to 50% of the area. I'm going to caveat that with there's a building control rule that we'll talk about later, but for planning terms, the planning department say up to 50% of your garden can be taken up by a building. It can be behind the house at any point. You can't go in front of the house. Anything in front of, there's an invisible line called the building line. Anything in front of that line you can't build in front of. But apart from that, you're good to go, based on a few points we'll bring up later in heights and sizes. If you live in a conservation area, they're trying to conserve the rights of the road and like the look of the road. In those instances, you can build behind the house line, but not beside the house. So conservation, and if you're in a conservation area, you go from being able to put it beside the house and to the rear of the house, just to the rear of the house. If you've got any trees in a conservation area, you need to treat them like they have a TPO, a tree preservation order. This means that if you're thinking of needing to take a tree down to build any buildings, you do need to seek permission. If you're in a normal property, generally you do not, unless the tree has a specific TPO. If you're in an area of outstanding natural beauty or in a national park, the building must be within 20 metres of the back of your building. So you can't build it beside, that's the same as conservation, but now you can't build it maybe at the end of your garden. You have to have the entire building within 20 metres, no further than 20 metres, from the back of your house. If you have your house is listed, you live in a maisonette or a flat, then you do not have any permitted development rights. You have to seek planning permission, even for a small shed. So that's listed buildings, maisonettes and flats. And lots of people don't know about that on flats. But if you've got a flat, you need to get planning permission for any garden building. You also might be aware that you've had your permitted development rights taken away. It's something called an Article 4. This often happens if an agreed build for like a new house at the back of a large property, the council might, at the point of permitting that house build, take away the PD rights. So you do need to check all of that out. The only way of being 100% watertight is to get that certificate of lawful development approved. But in most cases, people know that and then can just work towards understanding those rules in a good way. So now let's look at what you can do within permitted development for a garden building in your home. If you're thinking of having the building within 0 to 2 metres away from any boundary, the entire building must be under 2.5 metres high. If that's an apex building, that means the ridge is at the 2.5 metres, and that makes the eaves very low. And the design, therefore, is very difficult to align doors and windows. It makes the eaves quite low. So in this instance, it's rare that we would recommend an apex building. We would normally recommend a pent building or flat roof building in this instance. You can utilise all of that 2.5 with an EPDM rubber roof, for instance, with just a very small slope to the rear. So the whole building needs to be under 2.5 metres high when you're within 0 to 2 metres. If the entire building can be 2 metres or more away from all boundaries, then there's a different set of rules. For a pent building, you've got 2.5 at the eaves, which is the low side, and up to 3 metres at the high side. And this is a great option if you're looking for a gym or endless pool, something where you need that extra height, running machines and things like that. So that's a really nice option for there. If you've got an apex building, you then have a 2.5 eaves and up to 4 metres on the ridge, which is a very impressive height. In fact, we here at Bakers have never built one at those heights. It just doesn't feel needed. It feels too aggressive. So we normally stick around 3.3 metres. So that's the basic rules of what you're allowed to do. The negative of a 2.5 metre building near the boundary might be that the 2.2 metres internally it gives you, that is company depending, but that's roughly what it's going to be once you remove the roof structure and the floor and the base and all those things. May just not be tall enough for you, so bringing it away from the boundaries might give you that extra bit of headroom and height that you would like. So a big question we're asked a lot of the time is, where is the 2.5 measurement taken from? And we've had clarification from a number of planning officers over the years that it is taken from the highest ground around the building, which may not necessarily be at the front. So you could imagine that you've got a sloping ground, you're at ground level at the back, but at the front the ground might slope away by 2, 3, 4, even 500 millimetres. And therefore the building at that point might be even 3 metres high, 2.5 as the building plus the 0.5 metre of the ground slope. But it's always from the highest ground directly surrounding a building. You can't go off a couple of metres and find a mound and use that. It is directly around the building, but it is always from the high side, and that's a really important point to make. For the building itself, you can go any height out of the ground, but once you come outside of that, if you were building decking or steps, that can be no greater than 300 millimetres above that ground at that point. If none of these heights are going to work for you, and for instance you want a 3 metre building near a boundary within 2 metres of the boundary, and therefore we can't make that work under permitted development, that's when you need to go and seek planning permission to ask the council if they're happy for you to have that taller building. If your application is sensible and it doesn't impact on others very much, it is very likely you will get planning permission, and we highly recommend in these instances where we recommend it, where you need it, that you go and get planning and not build the building illegally. So now you know where you can put your building and the sizes that you're allowed. It's worth bringing to your attention what you can use the buildings for. It's critical for both PD and for planning that these buildings are ancillary use of the house and not primary. A primary use would be something like a dining room, bedroom or kitchen, whereas an ancillary use would be a gym, office, poolside room, cinema room. It's very critical that you are only using it for ancillary use. You're not allowed to stay in these buildings overnight, so therefore a bedroom is not allowed. You are allowed, however, to put electrics, plumbing, kitchens and showers in there. It's not what you're putting into the building, it's how you're using it. If you're using that shower after getting out the hot tub, or is it a poolside room, if you're using it as a kitchen in an office, a shower in an office environment that's being used during the day, that's totally allowed. So you just want to think about that. If you need a primary use building like a bedroom, you then need to get planning permission, whatever, and then also you will need it to be a regulated building, whereas most garden buildings are unregulated. So far we've just focused on the planning rules, but we now need to just interact that with building regulations. There are some regulatory elements that we do need to consider. If you remember, we were saying that planning allows you to build up to 50% of your garden, but building regulations actually say if it's over 30 square metres, you must conform to full building regs. This means you're essentially building a small bungalow. You need structural calculations, groundwork's done in a completely different way, and the building must be signed off by building control. Most garden building companies build unregulated buildings 30 square metres or below. The 30 square metres is the internal space, does not include any canopies, so you can go bigger than that with, say, a canopy for a hot tub or something of that use. But you cannot go over 30 square metres anywhere in your garden. If your building is between 0 and 15 square metres, you can position it anywhere in your garden, and that means you go right up against boundaries. If your building is between 15 and 30 square metres, it either needs to be 1 metre away from the boundary or made of a non-combustible material on those aspects. This is all about spread of flame. If you imagine two 20 square metre sheds right up against the boundary, that they're timber, they could catch fire and spread the flame from one to another. If they're made of a non-combustible material, that would stop that, or they'd be 2 metres apart because of that 1 metre rule that building control put in place. So that's really critical. There's two things that we're aware, as a lot of companies either don't know that or choose to ignore it. If you're being quoted for a building over 30 square metres, there is no instance in the UK where you can build that without building regulations, and it is absolutely critical that you make sure that the buildings do have that. There's a lot of companies out there I know of selling unregulated buildings in excess of 30 square metres, and in the small print it's your problem. So please be aware of that. The other one with the spread of flame and the 1 metre rule, a lot of companies aren't aware of that again, and you could be building a building that then doesn't conform to the rules and the regulations. So it's really critical that you understand those two elements, because that's nothing to do with planning. Planning portal won't really tell you this. It's all to do with regulations and its intersection. Because the buildings are unregulated, we don't have to worry about telling them about the buildings that you're building, but you do need to get the electrics signed off by a professional, which is generally then Part P'd or auto signed, and that is sent over to building control, so you get your certificate to know the building is safe electrically, and therefore you can get it insured. So please remember, when it comes to building regulations, they interact and intersect with planning, and you must be aware of both of these elements for your garden building. So let's summarise the key points from this video today. If your garden building is within 0 to 2 metres of any boundary, the entire building must be under 2.5 metres high from the highest ground area. We always recommend a flat or pent roof for this. If you are able to make your building be 2 metres or more away from the boundaries, you can then go with some extra height, 2.5 at the eaves and 3 metres at the high of a pent or sloping roof. 2.5 at the eaves to 4 metres of the ridge of an apex building. That again is from the highest ground surrounding the building. Remember, any building that's unregulated must be 30 square metres or less. Any building over 30 square metres must conform to full regulations, have structural drawings and calculations, and this is not something that most garden building companies do. Remember that your building should be ancillary use to the house, not primary. If you're comfortable that it conforms to everything that sits within the permitted development rules, you can just get on and install your garden building. We do this many times in the year. If you have any uncertainties or feel you want that extra clarification, you can seek a certificate of lawful development from your planning officer, and that will prove that you don't need planning and gives you that peace of mind. By ensuring your garden building conforms to all the rules and the regulations, it becomes a true asset to your home. If you need to apply for planning, then you need to be aware that along with elevation and plan drawings done to certain scales, you will also need a number of statements to go alongside this. This could be waste minimalisation statements, fire statements, and others depending on which factor. We always recommend that you reach out to an expert with experience in this, but you can do it yourself if you'd like to. Here at Bakers, we offer planning and certificates of lawful development as part of our complete package to give you peace of mind.
So I hope this video has helped you understand the rules and the regulations far better. I recommend that if you have any questions or queries over the planning rules or regulations, you should get professional advice and seek clarification. Hopefully, the garden building company you're using will give you good advice, but I do know companies out there that either choose not to tell you or are unaware of these rules and regulations, so please be careful. You may also want to go to the government planning portal. This will give you further advice on planning, but please be aware that is planning only and not that interaction with building control that we've discussed in this video today. Thank you for watching, and do not hesitate to get in touch with us here at Bakers if you've got any questions or queries. Please like and subscribe, and thank you once again for watching.